With a gunshot, a reindeer with strange antlers tumbled to the ground in a wobbly fall. Stephen is a hunter and also a gourmet. Today, he arrived in the northern part of Alaska, in the Brooks Range, teaming up with his friend Tim to look for reindeer. The area is filled with winding rivers and vast lakes, home to various wildlife. They quickly found a herd of deer and spotted a stag among them. A stag can weigh up to 300 pounds, but unfortunately, local laws forbid hunting on the day of arrival. So, they had to wait until tomorrow to act. To get food, they decided to go fishing. They observed by the river and found a spot where the water was calm and started fishing. Stephen is skilled, and soon, a fish was hooked. The wild fish was full of life, fighting hard, but sadly, it was pulled ashore. It was a grayling, with tender meat and a great taste, very popular among the locals. Stephen taught Tim how to fish, and after several attempts, he also managed to catch a grayling. Now they were off to rest. The night passed uneventfully. The next day, dawn arrived again, and they began their hunting journey. Today, they were lucky as a herd of deer quickly appeared in their sight, migrating. They planned to wait ahead in an open grassland where the reindeer would stop to graze, giving the hunters their chance. They huddled in the bushes waiting, and soon a pair of huge antlers appeared first, belonging to an adult male reindeer. Seeing it hold its head high, Stephen admired it immensely. He knew that was their target. Tim started to aim, but the reindeer was moving, so he had to wait patiently. The opportunity came quickly, as the reindeer stopped. In a split second, Tim pulled the trigger. The reindeer, at the moment of being shot, tried to escape, but the shot was fatal, and it could only wobble and fall to the ground. They waited a while, and after making sure all was clear, they approached to check. Touching the reindeer's huge antlers, they felt a deep appreciation. After admiring it, they decided to process the reindeer on the spot, cutting open its belly to remove the intestines, as they spoil quickly and affect the meat's taste. Then, they cut the reindeer into pieces and packed them to take home. The hunt went surprisingly well, but they wouldn't leave just yet, as Stephen hadn't hunted his reindeer. However, daylight was fading, so they decided to enjoy their dinner. First, they fried the two fish, and while doing so, prepared some side dishes, a vegetable medley to go with the fried fish, enhancing the flavor. They laughed and talked as they finished off the two fish and then went to sleep. The next day, they resumed their search for reindeer, but disaster struck. The migrating herd seemed to have left the area. They didn't see any reindeer. After discussing, they decided to check where two lakes meet, and luck was on their side. A few stray reindeer appeared, but before they could act, a call came from the camp. It was the photographer signaling that a grizzly bear had appeared nearby, likely attracted by the scent of reindeer blood. The bear seemed eager, but the terrifying noises from the camp kept it at bay. After hesitating, it finally left the area. With no worries behind, they got back into hunting mode. They crept forward, getting as close to the target as possible. A robust reindeer came into their view. Stephen readied his rifle, waiting patiently for the right moment. The opportunity was fleeting. As the reindeer stopped, Stephen decisively shot. The reindeer ran a few steps, then fell heavily. Soon, they had butchered it and brought it back to camp. But disaster struck again. The grizzly bear had returned, still not giving up. Facing this bold intrusion, they each grabbed a rifle and approached the bear. Stephen shouted loudly, trying to scare it off, but the bear was not intimidated. So Stephen fired a shot into the sky, then aimed at the bear. Terrified, the bear sprinted away, but its pride was hurt. It looked back angrily at them before running off fuming. Next came the part they were most looking forward to. They threw the deer meat into a pan to fry, then took out some carrots, sweet potatoes, and chili peppers. After chopping them up, they added them to the pot with the broth. They also threw in some thyme for flavor. After waiting a while, they lifted the lid and a delicious aroma spread out, making their mouths water. They couldn't wait to taste it. The flavor was incredibly satisfying, leaving them utterly delighted. Stephen, a full-time hunter, had hunted a reindeer and secured a batch of quality meat. He cooked a delicious stew and enjoyed a great meal with his friend. The man's name is Stephen. Today, he came to the Talk River area in the Alaska Range, seeking the elusive Dall sheep. He teamed up with his friend Paul for this adventure. The area is known for its rolling, rugged mountains, which, due to their perilous terrain, are off-limits to most human activities. But it also attracts a large number of hunters. Each year, 2,500 people compete for a hunting spot. Some unlucky hunters have applied for 40 years without success, but Stephen was fortunate to get selected on his 5th attempt. However, local regulations require that non-local residents must be accompanied by a registered guide or a local relative during hunting. Luckily, Stephen's brother Danny, an ecologist and avid hunter, was with him. He met the criteria, so 3 of them would go hunting together. After arriving, they studied the map, and once they had a route planned, they set up a simple tent and began scouting the area. They hadn't seen any goats yet, but they spotted a black bear first, and not far from it, a grizzly bear. Indeed, this place was truly wild, with dangerous animals everywhere. Although the hunting season was 2 days away, the real work would start tomorrow. The next morning, they planned to split up to increase the chances of spotting a goat. Before heading out, they hung their belongings in a tree to keep them away from bears. Then Stephen and Danny set off together, while Paul went alone. A marmot curiously watched them, cursing loudly at these uninvited guests. The steep mountain trails drained their energy significantly. It took a lot of effort to finally reach the top of the ridge, coinciding perfectly with their planned time to meet Paul. They took out binoculars and saw Paul on the opposite peak. He had also reached his destination. Through hand signals, Paul indicated there were goats above their heads. With 15 hours until the hunting season started, they settled halfway up the mountain. The night passed quietly. The next day, the hunting season officially began. Stephen and Danny started climbing, but their luck was poor today. The top was covered in fog, severely obstructing their view. To avoid alerting the goats, they hid behind a recessed rock, waiting for the weather to improve. Hours later, the fog finally cleared, and they moved again, heading towards the summit. Upon arrival, they spotted 2 goats. Luckily, the goats hadn't noticed them yet. According to the law, they could only kill a ram that met specific criteria, which was having fully curled horns, a sign of a ram aged 8 years or older. Stephen carefully examined them, feeling that one of the rams fit the criteria, but he couldn't be 100% sure. He still needed to get within shooting range to see clearly. Their position was awkward. Any rash movement would surely alert the goats. So one kept watch while the other slowly crawled. After some effort, they successfully left the open area and avoided the goats' line of sight. They quickened their pace while the 2 goats continued playing. So far, things were going very smoothly. As Stephen was about to reach his spot, the goats began to move. For a better view, Stephen decided to climb to the top of the ridge. He pulled out his binoculars. The goats were still moving, but now the distance was sufficient. He could see the right horn of the goat. It was fully curled. This met the hunting criteria. Stephen aimed his rifle, waiting for the goat to turn. The chance came quickly. The goat stood sideways, staring blankly on a rock. Stephen pulled the trigger. The goat collapsed and started rolling. Stephen's heart tightened. If the goat rolled off the cliff, it would be hard to retrieve. He frowned deeply, watching the goat intently. After rolling for a bit, the goat finally stopped. Stephen breathed a sigh of relief. He walked towards the target. Up close, he could appreciate the goat's majesty. It had a pair of thick and powerful horns. Touching this weapon, Stephen was moved. This was certainly a king among the Bighorn sheep. He loved this animal, and he kept expressing his admiration. Paul arrived late from the other side. Together, the 3 of them dragged the goat to a flat area and began to butcher it. With their combined efforts, piece by piece of high-quality meat was separated. They packaged it by different parts. Then, each man packed a backpack and left the area. Next was the part they looked forward to most. Fresh ingredients often need only the simplest cooking methods. Stephen sprinkled some seasoning on the meat, then fried it in oil. He He also prepared some flour and baked a few cream biscuits. After some work, the delicious food was ready. The biscuits paired with the meat offered a unique flavor. The meat was neither dry nor tough, just chewy enough. They all enjoyed eating it heartily. This was a very successful hunt. The men hunted a bighorn sheep and obtained 300 pounds of meat. Stephen cooked the tenderest cuts, paired with a biscuit, and had a satisfying meal. He is a full-time hunter. This time, he came to Mexico's Madre Mountains to hunt turkeys. This place is one of the driest, most desolate places on Earth, but it's home to the Gould's wild turkey, one of the world's rarest and longest-legged turkey species. They have thrived here for thousands of years. This was Stephen's first time hunting Gould's turkey. He was joined by his friend Jay, whose family has farmed here for 200 years. He too is an avid hunting enthusiast. For this expedition, they prepared a few turkey decoys. After checking their supplies, they set off on their journey. Their ATVs sped along the rough roads. Soon, they arrived at the site. The rest of the journey needed to be approached carefully. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Their first task was to find a place to spend the night. They would think about hunting tomorrow. On the way, they saw a line of very fresh turkey tracks. It looked like the two had already entered. They had entered the turkey's territory. Jay pulled out a tool and started mimicking the sound of a hen. A turkey appeared in their sight, but it quickly realized the other was not a hen and ran off immediately. The two climbed higher to get a better view of the surrounding terrain. The landscape below was clear. After some searching, they spotted 3 turkeys happily playing. But they didn't rush into action, instead observing the turkeys' movements to see where they would settle for the night. By evening, the turkeys flew up into sycamore trees to roost. Now they had a good idea of the situation. The next morning before dawn, they leaned against a rock, waiting for the first crow of the morning. As the sun rose, the turkeys became more vocal. They had already set up fake turkeys and used strings to move the models, making them look lifelike. They continued to use the tool to mimic turkey calls. Persistence paid off as a turkey rushed over in haste. It spread its tail feathers, trying to look charming to attract the hen. Love blinded, it ignored the hidden hunters. But before it could enjoy itself, a bullet pierced its body. It flapped a few times and then died. Poor king of beauty turkeys met the end of its brilliant life this way. Perhaps resentful, it even played dead. Stephen grabbed its neck with one hand and used a rock with the other, finally finishing it off. Carrying the turkey on his back, Stephen was beaming. He had finally hunted a Gould's turkey. Back at the farm, Stephen hung up the turkey and started plucking its feathers. He laid it out on a plate. For delicious turkey meat, ingredients are key. He prepared some salt and sugar, cut open a lemon, and soaked it in a pot. Then, he prepared a load of garlic, placing the turkey in the liquid to soak for a whole day. At 3 in the morning the next day, they got up early and ventured back into the wilderness to hunt another turkey. After a while, another lucky one sprinted over. From its running, you could tell it was in a hurry. The urgency was because another competitor had appeared. Stephen stayed calm and collected, quietly watching them perform. Not until a plump turkey stood next to the model did he pull the trigger. The turkey collapsed, another casualty on the path of love. They approached to check their prey, admiring its robust form. Stephen was so thrilled he couldn't help but mimic the turkey dance. After the frolic, they carried the turkey and started their return journey. Stephen went to a local charcoal factory and took away a sack of charcoal. Next would be the part he was most looking forward to. After a day of soaking, the turkey was well marinated. He laid the turkey on the wire rack over the charcoal, then sprinkled some chili on it, making sure to flip it on time to avoid burning the meat. Thanks to his careful handling, a delicious roasted meal was ready. Jay tore off a piece and tasted it, crispy on the outside, tender inside, with a unique flavor. Stephen also indulged in the gourmet food, celebrating a very successful hunt. He would remember this wonderful day. The man hunted a turkey, saw it wasn't quite dead, and quickly finished it off with a rock, then made a roasted chicken and enjoyed a great meal. The man's name is Stephen, a full-time hunter. Today, he came to the southwestern part of Montana, teaming up with a friend to hunt some grouse. Ronnie is a professional bird hunter who has trained several hunting dogs, the most reliable assistants. Now, each leading a hunting dog, they walked into the wilderness. Grouse are active in the mountainous areas. It took them half the day to get themselves lost. They checked the map. Fortunately, it just added a mile to their journey. Both were somewhat amused and frustrated and asked the photographer to cut this part out. They continued on, overcoming various difficulties, finally reaching the top of the ridge. Both needed a rest, but the hunting dogs indicated they were just warming up. Full of energy, they began searching for targets. Seeing the dogs so determined, the men got into work mode too. Before long, gunshots echoed in the wilderness. Ronnie fired 2 shots. Moments later, a dog came running back with a grouse. They had their first catch of the day. Ronnie couldn't help but show off to Stephen, making him quite envious. Stephen was determined to outdo the old man today. That's the competitive nature between men. But the forest was thick, making it tough to spot grouse. After wandering for a while, Stephen finally fired his gun. He had seen a grouse and pulled the trigger immediately. Inspired, Stephen couldn't stop, firing 3 shots in a row, but all missed, making him roar in frustration. This amusing scene even made Ronnie chuckle. Attracted by the noise, 2 curious grouse approached. Ronnie slowly moved forward, startling them into flight. That's exactly what Ronnie wanted. He loves to challenge himself, and his shooting was indeed magical, hitting every target. An impressed Stephen gave the first compliment of the day. Laughter and cheers kept echoing in the wilderness, fueling their excitement even more. Unfortunately, a sudden rain dampened their spirits. They had to end their hunt reluctantly. But the spring rain came and went quickly. Before they even descended the mountain, the rain stopped. They chose to clean the grouse by a stream. They removed the innards, because even the hunting dogs don't eat the guts. After that, they washed their hands in the creek. Then, with the grouse in hand, the 2 continued on their way. After a while, they reached the truck. First, they put the hunting dogs in the cages. Then the 2 set off on the journey back. Today's hunt wasn't fully satisfying, so they decided to come back again tomorrow. The next day, at the crack of dawn, they were back on the mountain, leading the hunting dogs and starting the search for grouse. It didn't take long before they spotted a grouse. Stephen silently raised his gun. The dog got the signal and dashed out, scaring the grouse into flight. Ronnie fired first, followed by Stephen. Soon, the dog brought back a grouse from the bushes. Today started off very well. They moved on, hunting with a relaxed, go-with-the-flow attitude, just picking any random, lucky grouse. One grouse flew by very fast, successfully escaping the hunt, probably spooked by the dogs ahead of time. They kept moving, today going farther and higher than yesterday. Unfortunately, today's catch was meager. By noon, the dogs were exhausted, so the 2 decided to head home. The grouse they had hunted over these 2 days were enough to make a delicious dinner. They came to the river and started processing the grouse. The skinning method was simple. Stand on 2 wings, grab the legs, and pull slowly but firmly. This split the grouse in 2. Aside from the legs, they discarded the rest. The breast meat was pink, very tender. They cleaned the meat, then heated oil in a pan. They prepared some chili, wrapped half a slice of chili with 2 pieces of meat, and fried it in the oil. The sizzling sound was delightful. The legs were fried directly. Once they turned brown, they added some cream. He also cooked a pot of pasta. There were 3 dishes in total, all looking and smelling fantastic. Ronnie couldn't help but exclaim in awe. He was eager to start eating. The hot chicken with the aroma of chili was intoxicating. Ronnie chewed enthusiastically, admiring Stephen's culinary skills. Just then, a doe appeared in their view, perhaps attracted by the scent of the food. But the hunters ignored it, because right now, showing off their meal was what mattered most. They heartily enjoyed their meal, savoring the true spirit of outdoor adventure. The man stood on the grouse's wings, grabbed the legs, and pulled slowly but firmly. This split the grouse in two. The man's name is Stephen, a full-time hunter and a gourmet. Today, he came to the southwestern part of Montana, hiring 3 alpacas to carry supplies. This time, they were prepared to venture deep into the forest in search of the elusive deer. Because it's also mountain lion territory, for safety reasons, they brought along a few more people this time and carried various supplies. A van set off along the highway, not entering the forest trail until evening. Tonight, they would sleep in the vehicle. After a simple dinner, everyone went to sleep. The night passed without incident. The next morning, they struggled out of their sleeping bags, first refueled with some breakfast, then started organizing their gear. Each backpack weighed about 20 pounds, hung evenly on both sides of the alpacas. Only with balanced loads could the alpacas avoid falling on the mountain trails. Once everyone was ready, it was already light out. Fully equipped, they led the alpacas and officially set off. This area is a public hunting ground, which means there could be fierce competition. But Stephen knows the area well. He would lead the team to avoid other hunters as much as possible. The group made crunching sounds walking on the snow. Though it sounded nice, the hard snow was uncomfortable underfoot. The hardest job fell to the photographer, who not only carried a heavy backpack, but also lugged a camera, constantly filming. On relatively flat ground, they hiked for several miles. They were about to enter steep mountain paths. They carefully checked and tightened the packs on the alpacas. Once everything was secure, they started climbing the mountain. Climbing was tough, and the photographer, needing to capture angles from all directions, really had to be fit for the job. After a great effort, they finally crossed the ridge and entered a flatter area. The first task now was to set up camp and then grab some food. Afterward, they went looking for game. Before long, Stephen spotted deer tracks in the snow and a human footprint alongside them. This meant other hunters were also tracking these deer. But it didn't end there. Next to them was a mountain lion's paw print. The situation was indeed complex. While Stephen was analyzing the tracks, a mule deer suddenly appeared in the distance. Stephen quickly crouched to aim, but it was just a juvenile deer. Usually, there would be more deer nearby. This young one, however, was staring right at them. To avoid alarming the herd, Stephen decided to circle around to the side. After some time, he reached a high ground, hoping to observe from above. Unfortunately, he saw nothing, and the sun was about to set. Today's hunting effort yielded no results. After sleeping for a few hours, they got up again, heading out before sunrise. They reached a high point and began waiting for the appearance of mule deer. The surrounding silence was almost eerie, sitting quietly for several hours. But they saw nothing. Stephen felt discouraged, as waiting like this was really hard on the spirits. So he decided to take the initiative, to see if he could encounter a herd. This choice turned out to be right. He found fresh tracks. A deer had passed through here in the morning. Following the direction of the tracks, he chased after them. Unfortunately, after walking a few miles, he still couldn't find his target. He had to stop again, took out his binoculars, and conducted a thorough search. Stephen had lost his initial enthusiasm. It was hard to believe that in such a wild and untouched wilderness, deer could be so scarce. 2 days of poor rest had left them all feeling physically and mentally drained. One of the photographers, Dottie, couldn't help but question, "Do we really need to keep waiting? I'm really hungry." Though Stephen wanted to continue hunting, he had to face reality and respect everyone's opinions in the team. It seemed they would have to return empty-handed today. So, feeling somewhat dejected, they headed back. So, this episode, like me, you've seen a lonely one. Hunting really tests your luck. Stephen led the team wandering in the deep mountains for 2 days, and still, they found no deer. Not ready to give up just yet, he then set his sights on another local animal, the common deer. Before they even set out, the alpacas made new sounds, expressing their dissatisfaction. These 2 days had really worn them out. Once everything was ready, they officially set off. Upon reaching the mountain, they set up camp first. Then the 2 photographers, along with Stephen, went deep into the hunting area to scout it out. A few years ago, Stephen had seen several deer in a burnt area. This time, he wanted to start there. Usually, after a fire, the area becomes lush and green, a perfect feeding spot. After a while, they finally reached the place. Stephen took out his binoculars to observe. Sure enough, a doe appeared in his view, and nearby, another deer. Indeed, this place was a treasure trove. Deer were everywhere. Stephen quickly identified a target, a young buck with tender meat, an ideal choice. They all smiled at the sight of the deer, almost tasting the delicious deer meat, and started to get excited. After studying the map, they walked along the mountain paths, trying to stay out of the deer's line of sight and quickly approached the target. Along the way, Stephen found a deer antler, an unexpected find. Antlers can be sold, so he tucked it into his backpack and they continued on. After crossing a patch of bushes, Stephen used his binoculars to look again, but the deer had vanished. Unwilling to accept defeat, Stephen decided to get a bit closer, following a dry riverbed. He moved forward slowly. When he reached halfway up the hill, he saw a deer again. Upon closer inspection, it was indeed the same buck as before, and it was within shooting range. Stephen used his backpack as a rest and adjusted the scope's focus. Unexpectedly, the buck joined the herd, making it impossible for Stephen to shoot without risking hitting another deer. But then, an opportunity arose. The buck stood alone on a rock, making it a much clearer target. Stephen pulled the trigger. The buck bolted at the shot and quickly disappeared. Stephen hurried after it and soon found it on the other side of the ridge, already lifeless. He dragged it to an open area, taking a moment to admire it. As dusk fell, there was some disagreement about how to handle the deer. After some discussion, they decided to process the deer right there. Turning on their headlamps, Stephen started the work. He slid open the deer's belly and used an axe to break the pelvis, then removed the organs. Next, he skinned it and cut off the scent glands on its legs, which are very smelly. Stephen continuously washed his hands with snow, but no matter how much he washed, there was still a lingering stench. He then quartered the deer, packed it up, and took it all with them. Walking at night, especially carrying a heavy load, is very difficult. But buoyed by the happy occasion, they laughed and talked all the way back to camp and started making dinner. Stephen prepared some tenderloin, tenderizing it with the back of an axe, then fried it in oil. The sizzling sound was delightful. This tender meat, cooked simply, retained all its delicious flavors, making it irresistibly tasty. They all enjoyed a hearty meal, spending an unforgettable night. When they got home, it was just in time for Thanksgiving. They prepared a feast, with the deer meat as the main dish. Amid laughter and joy, they enjoyed a wonderful family moment. The man hunted a deer, took out the tenderloin, fried it in oil, and had a great meal. The man's name is Stephen, a full-time hunter. This time he came to the central northern part of Montana, in the Missouri Breaks, a rugged and remote mountain area home to various wildlife, including deer. This hunt included 2 apprentices, who are actors by profession. To provide better service, Stephen had invited an experienced hunter. After some pleasantries, they organized their equipment and set off in 2 small boats. Desolation is a feature here, and the barren scenery all around can evoke a sense of desolation and weariness. But the sight of eagles flying overhead brings one back to reality. In the 19th century, this place used to be a hideout for horse thieves. The group quickly reached the spot and then chose to go ashore. They started setting up camp. They had brought easy-to-set-up tents, and in no time, the camp was ready. Then they split into pairs to start hunting. The first task in hunting is scouting. Knowing your enemy gives you the upper hand. They climbed to higher ground, hoping to observe from above. Unfortunately, Stephen didn't spot anything. Meanwhile, the other pair encountered something different. They spotted a deer moving quickly along the riverbed. Regrettably, it was a doe. However, they didn't get discouraged because soon after, several more deer appeared. They carefully observed, trying to spot a mature buck. Finally, a buck appeared, but Brian hesitated to shoot. The distance was a bit far, and the buck was still moving, making a clean shot uncertain. Out of humane consideration, they decided to give up the hunt. As dusk approached, they had to return to camp. Meanwhile, Joe and Stephen hadn't seen a single deer all afternoon. It was a rough start. At dawn the next day, they set off again. Today, Stephen was luckier. He quickly spotted 3 deer, including 2 mature bucks.